point that you raised of the third party that is not there in the room today, that could in many ways result in a failure of these talks. But I also want you to weigh in, on the positions that these two sides have started with. The Iranians have a 10-point plan that the Iranians have now put out in the public domain. They say that the talks will be on the basis of the 10 points that they've raised. Donald Trump has a 15-point plan that had been floated about 3 odd weeks ago. And when he posted that message of a ceasefire on a social media post, he had said that the Iranian 10 points would be the premise on basis of which the negotiations would be held, for which he was immediately criticized by a lot of people within the United States of America and Israel, saying that this is effectively a conceding of defeat and conceding to the Iranian position. After which, there were clarifications that started coming out from the Americans saying that the 10 points that the Iranians have put out in the public domain are not the 10 points that they discussed with the Americans. And to make it clear to the viewers, the Americans have not posted in the public domain the 10 points that they have spoken of with the Iranians. With this being the conflicting stance on what is being negotiated and what is the premise of these negotiations, do you think there can be a common ground on questions such as Iran's enrichment of uranium and its control of the Strait of Hormuz?
As I said, it's going to be very difficult. I think there has been a lot of playing games in the media by all sides as to what was agreed and whose 10 points and what was in it. Of course, there was no signed written document that one can go to. I think that what will really matter is less of what went on before, but the dynamics, the chemistry between the two sides now. Now, I think actually on the Strait of Hormuz, I suspect the Iranians will eventually concede on that one. I think this is a negotiating tactic on their behalf because I think they will probably realize that actually on this, the United States has the backing of much of the rest of the world. But on other issues, I suspect the Iranians to be somewhat tougher.
Right.
I think it will be tougher on the issue of enrichment, the right to enrich. I think it's going to be, not going to concede quite so easily about its support to non-state armed actors in the region like Hezbollah and the Houthis. I think that it will insist on the release of those funds that have been frozen, and I think it will expect a significant degree of sanctions relief. But the Americans, of course, will have their own demands as well.
Interesting. Mr. Joel, to talk a bit about the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Iranians have said that they intend to charge a toll for safe passage. There are reports which say that they want to charge as much as $2 million for these very large oil tankers. But if that is factored in for the price of a barrel of crude oil, that is about $1 charge that the Iranians want to charge per barrel of crude oil. Now, if there's a free movement of the crude oil from the Strait of Hormuz, the price of oil, of course, stays low. And a lot of nations, it appears, are willing to pay up a toll instead of having the Strait of Hormuz shut. Given the fact that the Americans and their allies have not shown any inclination to send in their navies to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, do you think the Americans can actually press on the Iranians to let free passage through the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, in my view, actually, there will be a huge pushback from other countries, just not the United States, on the Hormuz. Look, it's one of 6 straits in the world that you can't circumnavigate. None of them charge for this. This is not a charge in terms of assisting vessels through a particular waterway. So I don't think there's any legal basis for it. I think this is something that will be eventually dropped, but it will be used to try to extract other concessions from the United States in areas that Iran will see as more vital to its interests. But I don't think you're going to get into a situation where Iran will be able to do that. I think this is put into the negotiations in order to try to extract other concessions.
There are estimates which say that if Iran starts charging its toll and if this becomes normal and if the earlier pre-war level of traffic continues to transit through the Strait of Hormuz, Iran could end up earning anywhere from, the estimates vary, anywhere from conservative estimates say $10 billion to as much as about $70 to $80 billion per annum. It is not the kind of money that the Iranians will write off because they want to strike a deal with the Americans. Now, I want to also, ask you to weigh in a bit about how the Gulf nations would be looking at these negotiations, considering that they were under fire. Iran had turned the Gulf region into a shooting range. How would the Gulf nations be looking at these negotiations that are currently underway in Islamabad?
Well, there isn't a single view. There are some Gulf nations in the southern Gulf who, like Israel, would have preferred the United States and Israel to have finished the job, to have brought about a real defeat for Iran. There are others who are basically crossing their fingers and hoping that these negotiations are going to work and they're going to bring about a peace and the resumption of trade and security in the Gulf. But, in the medium to long term, the future for these states is going to be very tricky. They have sustained significant damage to their infrastructure, civilian, oil and gas. It's going to take a long time for them to rebuild that. But also it's undermined their position of being safe havens where businesses could set up their offices, where data centers could be kept, that there was this bubble of safety and security in the middle of the Gulf. And that has been, really undermined. Can they reclaim that? Can they convince businesses to come and relocate again in Dubai, in Qatar? That remains to be seen. But they will really want cast iron assurances that we're not going to get back to war, we're not going to get back to missiles flying over the Gulf, drones and the like. They will want to see a proper deal that ensures that Iran isn't a threat to their interests and there isn't going to be another major regional conflict.
Interesting. Now, my final question to you, Mr. Doyle, is this. You mentioned that these Gulf nations would want to see Iran to not be a threat. The Iranians have turned around and said the only reason why these Gulf nations have come under attack is because they host American military bases and they were used in staging attacks on Iran. In your assessment, how do you think the Gulf nations would be looking at the presence of American military bases on their soil, given what has happened in the last 40 days?
I think they're going to keep those bases because ultimately it was a lot of American munitions that knocked down a lot of Iranian missiles and drones. And where else are they going to get them from? It's not like Russia and China are going to come in to do that job, to provide that security. They don't have their own capabilities that they can manufacture locally. But I do think what they will do is to add extra layers of security from other countries, that they will not necessarily put all their eggs in the American basket in terms of their defense. I think also we will see them being pushed together to work together in terms of collective security. That even though there are these rivalries and tensions, that they have to overcome those and work together to demonstrate that they cannot be attacked like this in the future.
Indeed. Mr. Doyle, thank you very much indeed for joining us from London and getting us that perspective there.
A pleasure.